Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to an episode of Love and Abuse. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. And today's battle has to do with what I would call the flying monkeys of an emotional abuser. And flying monkeys is a narcissistic abuse term where the narcissist will convince people, your friends, your family, their friends, their family, your coworkers, your boss, anyone in your life, that you are the bad guy and they are the victim. The flying monkeys believe what the narcissist tells them, and they are just blind followers to whatever the narcissist says. And I'm going to call them blind followers today because not everyone is a flying monkey. Some people just come up with a conclusion because they were told that conclusion. And an emotionally abusive person is very good, or at least some of them are very good at telling people what the conclusion is about you. What is their analysis of you becomes the blind follower's belief. And that sucks. It sucks for you because now you have to take the harder road of trying to reverse that conclusion, trying to convince them of something else. But in this episode, I'm going to tell you not to convince anyone of anything. In fact, I'm going to give you some tools, some principles, some questions that you can use to help instill a seed of doubt in a blind follower, someone who believes what the abusive person has said about you. The person who blindly follows a lie about you, they need to have a seed of doubt in there so that they feel empowered to make a different choice or a different decision about their belief and about you, so that you have a chance to not be the bad guy in their eyes. I'm not saying this is going to work 100%, but again, this is only about planting a seed of doubt, allowing the blind follower to take a different direction in their thought process. Because if you can help them take one step in a direction that is not conclusionary about you being the bad guy, then at least there's a chance that the tides will turn and they'll have second thoughts about what they believe about you. And in an emotionally abusive relationship or any toxic relationship, there's something called the smear campaign. The smear campaign is when the abusive person smears your good name and your reputation and makes you look terrible in front of other people or to other people. And they want you to look terrible. They want you to look like the abusive person. They want to make you look like the bad guy. And I'm just using bad guy as a generic term. Could be a guy, could be a girl, could be someone else. Doesn't matter. I'm going to use the term bad guy because that's what happens, is that abusive people want you to look like the bad guy and they want to shine. They want to appear as the victim or the martyr. They want to appear as the person taking the bad behavior from you. And they want to appear as the resilient one. They want to appear like they're giving you every chance in the world, when in reality, you've probably given them so many chances and you've been super resilient and tolerant of their bad behavior. And now, on top of all that, you have to face the unbelieving and suspicious eyes of the blind followers, the flying monkeys that will believe anything the abusive person says. And I don't want that. I don't want you to have to deal with that, even though you might, and you may have already. So that's why in this episode, I'm going to give you some tools. The first tools are principles that I want you to follow. I mean, you can choose to follow. You can do anything you want. But if you follow these principles, there's a good chance you can help a blind follower think differently about you. And I've already said one of them, in a way, is don't try to convince them of anything. Don't try to convince them. And one of the principles I'm going to talk about in a second. I'm going to give you the first two first, and then the third one has to do with convincing as well. But the first one is don't get defensive. The abuser will tell people, they'll just get defensive. They'll just deny that, and you should expect that. So what the abusive person is doing is setting you up to meet the expectation the abuser wants you to meet, to convince the blind follower that what the abuser is saying is true. Let me say that again and hopefully simplify it. The abuser will tell the blind follower what to expect from you. So when you meet the blind follower's expectation, you look like the bad guy, because that's how the abuser set it up. So if the first thing you do is get defensive, I didn't do that. Why did they say that? I didn't do that. I was doing something else, or that's not what happened at all. As soon as you get defensive, you're going to meet the expectation that the abuser set up for the blind follower. And then the blind follower will say to themselves, this is what I was told to expect, which means you are the bad guy. Because I was told to expect it, those expectations are being met, which gives the other person, the abuser, the blind follower won't say the abuser, but the abuser in this case will be more credible. And everything that you meet that the abuser tells the blind follower you'll meet makes the abuser more credible. So we have to be really careful around this area of emotional abuse, because when you meet the expectations of a blind follower because they've been convinced that's what you'll do, it gives more credibility, more credence to the abusive person. So that's the first one. Don't get defensive. Don't be defensive. That'll be the first principle to remember. The second one is don't get emotional. The abuser will tell people, you're just going to get an overreaction. They always overreact. They're so dramatic. Everything is drama. Everything is drama. This is what I have to deal with. So they're going to be screaming or crying. They're going to be defensive. They're going to be emotional. This is what I have to deal with in this relationship 24/7. That's unfortunate, but this is what happens. The abuser convinces the blind follower of what you're going to do because the abuser knows what you're going to do. The abuser knows how to set up the expectation so that the blind follower gets those expectations met, and then you look like the bad guy. So the idea is if you're emotional, it matches what the abuser has said, and it makes you look bad. It makes you look like everything the abuser is saying is true, because if that's true, then the other stuff the abuser said is true as well. It must be, because I just confirmed it. This is convincing me that, the blind follower, it's convincing them that because you're this way, the abuser has set them up to believe that you also must be a terrible person. So there's that. Don't get defensive. Don't get emotional. And the third one is what I was saying earlier, except I say it this way: don't explain anything. Explaining is also convincing in a way, but you don't want to try to convince them. You don't want to explain anything, because the abuser tells the blind followers, well, they'll give you a bunch of excuses. They're going to have so many excuses. I hear these excuses all the time. They're just lies to protect themselves. So expect to get those excuses. And when you start explaining yourself, the blind follower is going to say, oh, this is what the other person was telling me. They were telling me to expect these excuses. And this is what puts together the puzzle. All the dots are going to connect. Oh, look at this person got defensive and they got emotional, and now they're trying to explain it to me and convince me. I guess they were right. This person is awful. And what I believed, because I'm a blind follower, they're not going to say that, but they already believe something about you, and now their belief is justified, it's confirmed, and now there's no going back. And I know there's people that are listening right now that have already dealt with this. I couldn't convince so-and-so. I couldn't say anything because they didn't believe me. And this may have been violated. These principles may have been violated. And so this is how you try to get to a better place with the person, to instill that seed of doubt so that that person can make up their mind and come to a conclusion that makes more sense and is closer to the truth. Because if they've been convinced by the abusive person that you're a bad guy, it is very difficult to convince them otherwise, which is why I say don't try to convince them. And now I'm going to give you some questions to help you help them move into a new direction with their thought process. Because they come to you with a belief about you, if they come to you at all, but if they say anything about you or they have this belief about you, it's going to be difficult to convince them otherwise. Then here are some questions you can ask them to help them think differently. And so first, follow the principles, and then you're going to ask these questions. And now, before I give you the questions, I want you to feel so confident inside yourself about what the truth is. That means when you know what you're doing is right and true and you're doing the best you can, it's not a matter of convincing someone else that you're trying to do the right thing or you are doing the right thing. It's a matter of exuding that confidence in yourself, knowing what you know to be true about you. I really want you to sit in that energy of self-confidence about what you know to be true about you. It may feel terrible to sit in the energy of, oh, that person is saying all these bad things about me that are untrue, but don't focus on that. Focus on what you know to be true. If they said you're a liar and you know you're not lying, you know you're honest, that's the self-confidence that I want you to be in. I know I'm not lying. I feel good in myself that I'm not a liar. So just absorb that self-confidence. Be in that self-confidence when you ask these following questions. And let me set this up. Somebody comes up to you and says something about you that you know isn't true or makes you look bad, and they believe it. They believe what the narcissist or the emotionally abusive person said about you, and now you're facing the blind follower and you have to say something. Follow the principles. Don't get defensive. Don't get emotional. Don't explain anything. And now you're in this confidence of knowing who you are, knowing that you're trying to do the right thing. And a question that you can ask is, and you believe that? That's a simple question. And you believe that? And you don't even need the inflection. You can say, and you believe that? It's even more confident. It's more commanding. And you believe that? Now, you may or may not get the answer that you want to hear, but what you're doing is you're not getting defensive, not getting emotional, not trying to explain or convince. You're just asking a question. You're instilling the seed of doubt to help them think in a new direction. So that's one question. Another question you could ask, and you can ask any one of these questions at any time. It just depends on the situation and the circumstances and the context. But another question is, what do you think about that? So somebody comes up to you and repeats a lie that the emotionally abusive person told them. And you can hear the abuser's words through the blind follower, and you're thinking, just repeating what that person said. I know that's a lie, and I can't believe they believe it. But here they are. Their belief in what you did and what the abuser said about you is in your face. So you can ask, what do you think about that? When you ask that question, it empowers the person to come up with a different thought. Now, they may say, well, I think it's true. You might have to deal with that. And you could respond to that saying, well, okay, I'm not going to convince you otherwise. You could say something like that. What you're doing is you're not offering a wall of resistance, and you're especially not offering the meeting of an expectation that the abuser has told the blind follower to look for. The abuser doesn't think that you're not going to be emotional or defensive or try to give a bunch of reasons or excuses. The abuser thinks that you're going to do all that. So when you don't and you just ask these simple questions, what do you think about that? It's going to throw a curveball into the abuser's game. You'll be playing your own game. It's not really a game, but you'll be out of the abuser's game, and you'll be making the rules. And that's what you want. You want to be able to make the rules and steer people in the direction that you know is right. And that direction isn't even trying to convince those people. It's just asking them to consider other things, to consider other possibilities. So that's another question is, what do you think about that? Another question is, don't you find it interesting that they said that? The blind follower comes up to you, says something awful about you. I can't believe you do that to your children. Don't you find it interesting that they would say that about me? Don't you find that an interesting thing to say that to you about me? I mean, that's another question is, why do you think they would tell you that? I can't believe how badly you treated them. Let's say the blind follower said that. I can't believe how badly you treated them. Don't you find it interesting that they said that? I mean, I'm even being a little bit unspecified in what I'm talking about. I'm not being very specific about what I'm asking. I'm actually leaving it open-ended and non-specific. And it's almost, you could say this with any context. Don't you find it interesting that they would say that? Or they said that? And that, again, allows the blind follower to think a little differently. Again, I'm not saying that this will work 100% of the time and it'll go in your direction, but this is also a way so that you don't meet the expectation of the abuser that was instilled in the blind follower. So those 3 questions. Let's go to the 4th one. You don't think it's a little unusual that they said that about me? You don't think that's a little unusual that they said that about me? That's another question that plants a seed of doubt. Again, you're empowering the blind follower to come up with their own conclusion. And that's a wonderful thing to do. This also works with kids. A lot of these questions will work with kids. There are often times that I'll hear from parents that say, my kids go to my exes, and then when they come home from my exes, they say all these bad things about me because my ex convinced them that I'm a bad person or I did these awful things. These are the questions that allow the child to come up with their own conclusion. And this is quite effective for many, many situations and many, many people, including children, is just to open their mind to other possibilities, because you're not closing their mind like the abuser does. See, there's a subconscious trick going on here. The abuser knows how to close the mind of the blind follower. If you come along and open their mind, there's a subconscious thing that can happen. The subconscious thing is the blind follower thinking to themselves, this person, the abuser in this case, wants me to believe something very specific. They gave me all the details that I should know. But this other person, the victim in this case, probably you, is opening my mind and letting me make my own choice. There's something about that. There's something that I don't like about having a closed mind versus having an open mind. This is scary to some abusive people. They don't want a blind follower to have an open mind to consider all sides of something, unless they're an abuser that is healing. That happens. There are emotionally abusive people that are on a healing path and are willing to let someone make their own choice about what's going on. But I'm talking about the abusers that really want to smear you, really want to drag your name through the mud. So that could be another question is, you don't think it's a little unusual they said that about me? Another question is, did you notice how they reached out to as many people as they could to tell you how awful I am? That's a long one, and it may not be as effective, but it could be. Did you notice how they reached out to as many people as possible to tell you how awful I am? it does is instill a little bit of questioning. It's instilling a curiosity. It's that seed of doubt that is important for closed-minded people, or at least they're closed-minded about this, to open their mind a little bit and consider things a little differently. Because, in my opinion, it is unusual for somebody to go around and tell everyone how bad somebody is. That's a bit unusual. That's unusual behavior. And pointing out the unusualness of that behavior can help them think in a new direction. Another question is, have you heard me say anything awful about them? This one may not be as effective, but I wanted to include it just in case it came in handy at some point in time. Have you heard me talk about them in a bad way? Have you heard me say anything awful about them? And again, this may not be as effective, but this could be another tool in your tool belt just in case, because what often happens is the victim of emotional abuse, because they usually get defensive or emotional, because they're trying to be convincing or explaining, and because they're usually kind and compassionate, caring people who are just trying to do the right thing and just trying to make the relationship work or just trying to get through the bad situation, a lot of them don't like to talk bad about people, even those who have hurt them. So this question may not work if you have said a lot of bad things about the other person, but if you're the type of person who doesn't, you may want to remind the blind follower, have you heard me say anything awful about them? That just opens their mind a little bit for them to realize, you never do. Now they may think, well, you never do because that person's perfect. But if that's how they're thinking, then you may not be able to convince them of anything. Not that you're trying to convince them, you're just trying to change the direction of their thought. But they may not be able to change their mind, and that's okay. Some people, you can't do it. You're just trying to instill the seed of doubt. Next one, I've got, I think, 3 more. Do you find that at all unsettling? I actually like this question because I like the word unsettling. That doesn't feel settling. It feels unsettling. That's when I'm thinking about the situation that the blind follower is describing. You did this and you did that. Well, do you find that all unsettling? Meaning, do you find what they said unsettling? Maybe I should reword that, but do you find what they said at all unsettling? That might be a way to ask it. Don't you find that unsettling at all? That they shared all that with you, or that's really over-the-top behavior that they say I'm doing? Doesn't that strike you as unsettling? They may say, well, yes, it does. Why are you doing this stuff? Which, will make you want to be defensive or emotional or explaining again, but don't go there. Just ask, do you find that at all unsettling? Or these other questions as well. Next one, why do you think they said that? This is one of my favorites. Why do you think they said that? This expands someone's mind in a different direction for sure, because you're not focusing on the topic, the subject at hand. You're not focusing on the very specific thing that the blind follower is talking about. You did X, Y, Z, and you're a bad person. You're not focusing on that at all. You're just helping the blind follower ask the question, why do you think they said that? Because in order to answer that question, there has to be a because in their mind. The because may be, well, because you're a bad person. But it also opens the possibility of them saying to themselves, because they want to make you look bad. You don't want to say those words because they want to make me look bad. That could be the conversation, but again, you're not trying to convince them of anything. You really want the blind follower to come up with their own conclusion, which is why I like these open-ended questions. Why do you think they said that? And this leads to the last question. What do you think about that? Another really good question for anyone, including kids. What do you think about that? This truly empowers someone to come up with their own thoughts about things that they may have closed off in themselves. The blind follower may have closed off these thoughts in themselves, and they weren't going to go anywhere else until somebody asked them the question, what do you think about that? All of these questions are designed to instill further investigation, to instill doubt, and instead of having blind faith in what the abuser is telling them, because people get duped all the time. They get duped by hurtful people because the hurtful person knows how to manipulate so well. They are believable. They know how to manipulate. They know how to convince others because they'll play the victim. The abuser will play the victim. And when they do, you can't meet the expectation that the abuser wants the blind followers to meet. And you don't want to meet the expectation of the abuser when you're in direct contact either. This is why the gray rock technique is so popular when it comes to emotional or narcissistic abuse. Gray rock technique, if you aren't schooled on that yet, is acting like a dull, gray, emotionless rock. I like rocks. Maybe that's a bad term, but a gray rock on a beach or a gray rock in the woods. It's just a dull, lifeless, emotionless gray rock, and that's why they call it the gray rock technique. So if you act like a dull, lifeless, emotionless person, then the emotions that the abusive person is expecting from you so that they can utilize them and use them against you aren't there, which means they have no fuel to burn you. They would light that fuel on fire to make you feel bad. But if you don't give them an emotion to fuel their fire, they can't abuse you. I mean, they'll find ways, but your emotions are used against you, which is why gray rock can be so effective, because an emotional abuser needs emotions from you to abuse you. That's how they can tell what to do next. Oh, good, they're crying. I know what to do next, because when they cry, they're vulnerable. When they're vulnerable, I can put them down and belittle them so that later they come to me and apologize and try harder to please me. I know the drill. This is the abuser talking. I know the drill. I know what to do when I get this emotion. Oh, now they're angry. I know what to do next, because I'm going to take that anger and turn it around and make them angry at themselves, or make them confused, or make them feel guilty. I'm going to turn this around so that I'm not in the spotlight, so that they stop thinking about me and all the bad behavior I'm doing. I'm really embellishing here. I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is what can happen. In some abusive situations, this is what happens. The abuser turns your emotions against you to make you feel bad, to make you focus on yourself so that you don't focus on them. If you're not focused on them, they keep their power over you. They keep the control. They keep manipulating you. They keep doing whatever they want to do, and you pay for it. That's why gray rock can be so effective. It's a really good technique, and it's very, very hard to do, because most people that listen to this show are compassionate, kind, caring, supportive, generous people, and they are very connected to their emotions. And some of you are more sensitive than others, so you're empathetic and you care. And when the abuser plays the victim, it's hard for you not to care. And I understand that. And I understand that gray rock is a very difficult thing to do. I've had to walk people through it before, and they didn't want to do it. But when they did it, it did calm the abusive behavior. And it made the abuser confused, because without emotions, they don't know how to abuse you. They find ways, unfortunately, but that is their main source of abuse. That's why it's called emotional abuse. They are taking your emotions and using them against you. They use what you feed them, and they need to be fed your emotional response in order to create an abusive response in return. So I hope I've achieved my goal with this episode to give you some questions, some tools, some principles to help you with the blind followers, or what some people consider flying monkeys, because that's what the Wicked Witch of the Wizard of Oz had at her disposal. She had a bunch of flying monkeys that would do her bidding. Whatever she said, they'd do. That's where that term comes from. And they didn't question. They just did it. And when the abusive person utilizes people to use against you, isolating you, making you feel like you're all alone, it can be quite disempowering. It can feel demoralizing. You can feel like you have no friends left. You have no support system. And so I want to help you keep your power. I want to help you make sure that you give everyone an opportunity to think differently if people believe something about you. And I hope these tools from today's episode help. Thanks for listening, and share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. You can use the workbook to determine if you are in an emotionally abusive relationship, and it also helps you pinpoint the specific unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. If you're in a difficult relationship and you want to know what your next step should be, the workbook will help you make decisions that are right for you. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. If you've discovered that you are doing emotionally abusive behavior and you'd like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thanks for joining me today. We'll talk again soon.